this meeting of ACAP, which is April 29th of the year 2013. Welcome very much to the program. Our guest tonight is a real scholar, and he's been looking at the effects of what happened in 2007, 2008, and so forth. And he's written a monumental book. I'll show it sort of this way here. His name is Jes Leopold, and it's titled How to Make $1 Million an Hour. Is there anyone here would like to get a gig that will bring you $1 million an hour? Is that something that might appeal to any of you?
Absolutely.
You would. Okay. Anyway, but it's subtitled, Why Hedge Funds Get Away with Siphoning Off America's Wealth. It relates to the large issue of what's going on with the financial world, ever since, well, particularly after 2008 and so forth. So let's give him a welcome. Jes Leopold, thank you very much. When it gets to these questions, there may be other people coming, try not to let that bother you. But when you do, speak up as much as you can for the audio, okay? So talk as loud as you can when you ask questions, and if you can talk as loud as you can in order for the audio quality. Okay, thanks again. Once again,
Would it be okay if I stand up?
Yes, if you want. Yeah, you can stand up, yeah. And try to stay behind the green screen. Okay, fine. Jes Leopold, let's give him a hand.
Thank you very much for inviting me here.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it. I want to tell you about the questions that got me into exploring this topic of extreme wealth in the hedge fund community. When I was writing my last book, which is called Looting of America, I came across a statistic, a factoid, that so blew my mind that I just had to find out more about it. I found out that in 2010, this is after the financial crisis, something called a hedge fund manager, a person called a hedge fund manager, made $2.4 million an hour. An hour, which is as much, in 1 hour, he made as much as it takes the average American family to earn in 47 years. So 1 hour of work equals 47 years of the average American's work. How could that be? What do they do? So the question that drove me forward was to figure out whether or not there was some kind of fair exchange of value. For example, we have a dentist with us. He performs dental work. Patients pay him because they get a service that they consider fairly high value, or they wouldn't come to him. It's an exchange we all can understand. Kick it up another level. We have millionaire entertainers. Dentists are not entertainers. But we have a millionaire, unless they give out nitrous oxide in large amounts. We have Bruce Springsteen, a superstar musician. He produces music. We like his music. We pay money to hear his music. It's an exchange we understand. So I want to see what's the exchange that goes on that leads to $1 million an hour. The first question that came up is, well, is this really an outrageous sum? I mean, it's a very rich country. People say there's lots of other rich people. There are rich baseball players and golf stars and movie stars. So how much are these guys all that different? Well, it turns out they are. That the average, the first chapter of the book goes through the top 10 in all these different fields. So the top 10 lawyers, the top 10, couldn't find the top 10 doctors or dentists, they don't publish that information. Top 10 movie stars, top 10 sports athletes, et cetera, et cetera. No. And for example, the top 10 hedge fund earners earn 40 times as much as the top 10 movie stars. Right? So they're in another world. They earn, 10 to 100 times more than almost every CEO in every other kind of industry. So they're really someplace else. So the exchange of value that gets them there becomes a very important thing to understand. So how do they do it? So I looked more deeply into this guy that earned $2.4 million an hour. And if I can walk you through a little bit of how he did it, but I can't do justice because I would need a blackboard and a little more time. There's actually a YouTube, not YouTube, C-SPAN Book TV. I do a talk for a adult worker college class at SUNY, and it's about an hour and 20 minutes, and it's on Book TV. It's still on there. But I'm going to give you the shorthand. It's so outrageous, absolutely so outrageous, that when I first heard about this, I thought this is an aberration. It can't be something that really happens. But in fact, it happened, and it happened repeatedly. And if you can understand what happened, you'll understand why we had a financial crisis. Here was the deal. This guy made $1 billion doing the following. One trade, $1 billion. Here's how he did it. He got together with Goldman Sachs, our friendly bank down the street here, and they worked out the following scheme. He went and he sought mortgage pools that had the worst mortgages he could find. These would be subprime mortgages in places like Nevada, Arizona, Florida, that were done by the most predatory mortgage lenders like Countrywide and some of these other ones that have now been gobbled up by other banks, and where there were all sorts of charges against them for giving out deceptive mortgages. So he found the ones that were going to reset. This was like in 2006, or they were mortgages that were given out in 2004 with a low rate to begin with, and then 2 years later it was supposed to jump up to a very high rate. He knew lots of people were going to default because these were the worst loans. That's the ones he was looking for. They put them together in something called a synthetic collateralized debt obligation, which actually doesn't even have any real mortgages in it. It references, this is the part that's a little crazy, and I don't expect you to get this right away, but it's a product that is entirely artificial. It pretends that it owns something. It's like a bet. I'll bet you that the lights on the 50th floor of the Empire State Building will go off and on in 20 minutes, right? And if one of them goes off and on in 20 minutes, I win. But I don't own those lights, right? I'm betting as if I had something to do with the lights. Well, they were betting as if they owned the mortgages, but they didn't own the mortgages. So for a second, just pretend that they put the mortgages in a package. Well, the way it worked was these three big institutions put up $1 billion, thinking that they were going to get the interest payments, when people paid principal and interest back on these mortgages, they were going to get those, or what was the equivalent of those. And they put their $1 billion into a pool. Then this hedge fund guy, unbeknownst to the investors, was going to use that money as an insurance policy for himself. So that if there was a default, lots of defaults in those underlying mortgages, he would get that big $1 billion pile of insurance money. And he paid premiums every quarter of a year to get that money. That's a weird thing, but let me walk you through it again. They put up $1 billion. It basically gets sent to an offshore bank and sits there and collects interest, and it's like an insurance policy. And then if you bet, the guy on the other side is betting that the mortgages will fail. If they fail, he gets the $1 billion. If they don't fail, he has to keep paying premiums to the people who put up the money. That's their interest. That's how the game is played. Well, they didn't know that this guy was picking the worst stuff to put in it. So lo and behold, in 6 months, the whole security collapsed. The financial product collapsed. It failed. It was designed to fail. and sure enough it failed. They lost $1 billion. He gained $1 billion. Just like that. So what he was doing was designing a financial instrument so that it would fail and so he could collect the insurance. It's the equivalent of me selling you a pharmaceutical product that will kill you so that I can collect the life insurance on you.
Which they do.
Well, now they don't do it quite like that. They may put out a shoddy product, but they're not permitted to take out life insurance on you. Nor are you permitted to take out homeowner's insurance on your neighbor's house. 800 years ago, they figured out if you do that, if that was permitted, somehow or another the neighbor's house would burn down. Right? It would happen. Who knows how it would happen, but they figured it out. It was going to happen. So you have to have an insurable interest to insure anything except in high finance. You don't need to have an interest at all. All you need to do is put it together, and if investors are willing to flock towards it, if you're deceptive enough, you can pull this off. Now, the SEC investigated this little thing, and there was a huge, actually a great government investigation of it, where both the Democrats and Republicans unanimously agreed on the findings. And the SEC fined Goldman Sachs $550 million for not telling the investors that this guy was doing what he was doing. Guess how much the hedge fund guy had to pay? You're in the right business. 0. Because it was not his obligation to disclose anything. So you can design a product that will fail as long as you tell the investors that you're designing it to fail. Now, this wasn't just done by one hedge fund. It was done by numerous hedge funds. It wasn't just done by one bank. It was done by all the major banks because they were trying to get rid of the trash that they had accumulated, all these mortgage pools that they accumulated during the housing bubble. They saw the top of the housing bubble coming, and they wanted to get rid of this trash as fast as possible. And they got rid of it all over the world. They sold these securities that were designed to fail to pension funds, to European banks. They sold them to 5 school districts in Milwaukee. That's how I got into this, because my in-laws live there. And they lost these 5 school districts lost $200 million in 6 months. What? And they had to pay back a loan for $150 million. So now by the way, they're winning their lawsuit because this, again,
In Iceland too.
in Iceland too, everywhere. So, so this wasn't just a game that affected the winners and losers, a few rich people. This was a game that affected the entire financial system. And we are still experiencing the result of the crash. It accelerated the boom on the way up, and then accelerated the crash on the way down. And when the crash occurred, the reason we're facing all this unemployment now, a financial crash is the same as a heart attack. The financial system is like the blood in our system, And it froze. The financial system actually froze. And it froze because no bank trusted each other anymore. Because they said, well, we know that our bank is littered with this toxic trash. We're not going to lend money to this other bank because we don't know how much toxic trash they have. So nobody loaned any money to anybody once the collapse started. Because banks lend money to each other, right, every day. Their money's moving around every day. It just all stopped. And when it stopped, all the businesses around the country that depend on credit, which is everybody, couldn't get it. And the ones that didn't have robust credit lines that were already open, and were trying to get new credit lines, they couldn't get it. They had to start laying off people. They couldn't make payroll. And we're still in this precipitous high unemployment crash, precisely because of this creation of toxic waste. So I'm just going to give you a few more, and then we can open it up for questions. If that's all the hedge funds do, you could say, well, only a few people could be playing this game. This isn't like endemic to all 9,000 hedge funds, right? It must be, you can't have all 9,000 playing this game. That's true. There were only, a few dozen that were milking us that way. But they have other ways. And the way we designed the book is it's a how-to book. So each chapter basically is another set of lessons that you have to learn, another set of techniques if you want to make $1 million an hour. As a matter of fact, I got one bad review on Amazon because somebody bought the book thinking it was going to be like about hedge funds. And he writes, he says, wait a second, this book is about the financial crisis. It's not about hedge funds. In fact, it's all about hedge funds, but it's not about what he wanted to learn about hedge funds. Where's my how to make $1 million an hour? So he was disappointed. If I had, matter of fact, several people suggested don't put a subtitle on it because a lot of people are going to buy it because they want to make $1 million an hour. But I couldn't do that.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, right. Well, wait until we pass the hat. You know what my fee is. Hope you have a checkbook. Anyway, the other techniques that we have a chapter about, something. The obvious is that insider trading. If I know something about a corporation that nobody else knows, it's impossible for me not to make money. It would be very difficult. So I went to the trial of this guy, Raj Rajaratnam, a billionaire hedge fund guy who got sentenced for 9 years. I went to the sentencing, actually. And I looked into, there's a whole industry which I call the hedge fund cheerleader industry. These are the people that write in defense of hedge funds. And they claim lots of things. They claim that they're more valuable to the economy than all of Silicon Valley. With all their innovations and stuff. Of course, unfortunately, the book was written just before the crash, so they were praising all these financial instruments that turned out to be these terrible things. But their argument is, yeah, there's insider trading, but you know what? It's not really the hedge fund's fault, and there's not much of it. So I looked into this, and there's probably a lot of it. So much so that the federal attorney for New York that's investigating is now saying that he believes that hedge funds' entire business model is corrupt. He used that word, corrupt business model. This is the guy most closely investigating them. And he's put 70 people, he's convicted or had them plead guilty, 70 of them so far. And it's more like a tip of the iceberg than a few rotten apples in the back. One of the ones I like the best, and then I'll stop, is, Jim Cramer, the guy on Mad Money?
Yeah.
The frenetic guy, toots horns on television, CNBC. He's there you go. He has all these, he's like a cult figure. He's actually charming in his own way. He's so effervescent. But he ran a hedge fund for 10 years. And 10 years after he stopped, he was making, his rate of return was 24% a year. His average rate of return over 10 years, each year was 24%, which is, interesting. How did he do that? Well, 10 years later, he confessed. By the way, when he was running his hedge fund, he also was a commentator on CNBC, on the news shows, because they loved having, somebody from the financial industry on the show talking about it.
Kudlow and Kramer.
What?
Kudlow and Kramer.
Before that,
Yeah.
he was even, Kudlow and Kramer, that was a news show. That was his own news show. Before that, he was just like a guy that would talk on, they bring him on for a little while every morning before he went to his hedge fund or on his way to his hedge fund. He then does an interview on his own website that he partially owns, half ownership of thestreet.com. And he says this. He says, here's one of the ways I make money. I would go to CNBC and I would plant a false story with one of my co-journalists. Bob Pisani, he was one of them, who was a very straight-ahead business reporter. He would give him a false lead that Pisani couldn't check. Like he'd say something about Apple. Apple never responds to a reporter's questions about internal things. So he would say, I know something's going to happen with this certain product that isn't doing well with Apple. He would tell Pisani. Pisani would check it. Apple wouldn't say anything. And then Pisani would report, a source tells me, blah, 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 blah. Down goes the stock of Apple. And Kramer was shorting it. Boom. Makes a quick killing on it. And he would do this periodically, again and again and again. Imagine that, manipulating your own colleague on your television, your journalist network. On top of that, this is the part that gets me. He talks about other techniques he used. But this is the killer. He says, if you are not willing to do these things, this is a quote, maybe you shouldn't be in the business. In other words, he is saying, this is the way the business operates. This is what we all do. And if you don't do this, you get wiped out. Because it's very cutthroat. If you're not getting these high returns, people can take their money out and just move it to somebody who is getting the high returns. And you're talking about people moving large chunks of money, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. So he was honest. This was very funny. This was done on it was a YouTube for a while, but then his website claimed it back and wouldn't let it be seen anywhere anymore. But a transcript still exists on the internet. You can find the transcript of his dialogue, and it's hysterical. What I like about it the most is the journalist who was interviewing a young guy from his own website. Is once he sees what Kramer's saying, he tries to change the subject. He tries to get him to stop talking about these former criminal acts. And Kramer would say, "What are you talking about? I want to talk about this." And he brings the conversation back again and again and again to basically his corrupt acts. It's of course 10 years later, and the statutes of limitations are up. But it tells you something, I think, profound about hedge funds. Anyway, there are many, many more techniques that we get into here. And the point I want to make is this. Here's the bottom line. The financial system as we now know it, with large banks and large hedge funds, is designed to rip us off. By the way, inside of the large banks, they have their own hedge funds called proprietary trading desks. They're the same thing as a hedge fund. In fact, large banks invest in hedge funds, and they take a stake in it. And they have their own similar operation inside. When we hear Wall Street gambles, this is where the gambling takes place. But there's something very important you have to keep in mind. They don't want to gamble. You don't make billions of dollars by gambling. You make billions of dollars by rigging the bet so that you can win your bets. You do not, it's not like walking into Vegas and there's certain odds and you're going to gamble. You want to rig the table before you place your bet. You want to know how the race ends before you place your bet. And there's so many different ways that they can do that. And the genius of Wall Street is figuring out more and more ways to do that. And there was this, and the best thing, of course, is if you can do this with taxpayer-insured money. That's the dream. That's what J.P. Morgan Chase just got caught doing. Is that where you were? They catch it. This will be the last one. But I just want to explain that it's part of the financial system, not just a bunch of privately held hedge funds. They have, inside of J.P. Morgan Chase, they have a division that has to. It's stuck with $700 billion of deposits that they are not investing in businesses. They're not loaning out for mortgages or businesses. It's extra money. And they gave about $100 billion of this to play with to this guy called the London Whale, who was running a hedge fund. And he was betting, he thought he had a way to corner the market. And he had a sure thing going and was building up, he made $2 billion in a very short period of time. He's using federally insured taxpayer money, taxpayer insured deposits, our deposits that are insured by the federal government. That's what he's using. Anyway.
Not all of them.
Yeah.
Not all deposits are insured.
Right.
But only minimal.
Right. So he is playing with that money. He makes $2 billion. He thinks he's got it all figured out, but unfortunately he didn't have it all figured out. And then in a matter of a few months he loses $6 billion. And it could have put a very large bank in jeopardy, starting another big problem for us. Anyway, it hasn't changed. And the question ultimately before us is, what are we going to do about this? Are we just going to wait for the next crash? Do we really think that the regulations that were put in place, the very weak Dodd-Frank regulations, are going to do anything about this? I don't think so. Very few of them. In fact, the hedge fund industry is virtually untouched by regulation. We call it the shadow banking system. So we have the large banks with their own hedge funds that are still playing as if nothing happened in 2008, and then we have the private hedge funds. We have a financial system. If you want more on this, I write for Huffington Post all the time. If you look up my name in Huffington Post, you'll find more than you ever wanted to read.
Right.
And,
It's all good.
sometimes they get lucky and they put it, on the top of the front page, and I'm very happy for that. Because I think people want to know about this stuff. So our hope is that we can help spread some financial literacy so that we feel more empowered to stand up to what's going on and to become part of some kind of uprising down the road that will lead to a more sane financial system. What we need is a real financial system. What we don't need is kind of a rigged Las Vegas system in the largest financial institutions in the world. But we don't need that. We need a regular financial system where savings gets turned into investment. It's very simple, what they call financial intermediaries. What we don't need is what we have now. It's incredibly dangerous, and it can blow at any time. It could last, another 20 years and not blow, but my guess is it will blow sooner than that because it's actually as dangerous or more dangerous than it was before the crash. That's my story. We have some copies of the book, which I don't have enough for everybody, but you're welcome to take it. And floor is open for questions or comments or whatever. Yes?
Thanks very much, Les. Thanks for this. I had taped, as you know, I'm not sure they do, we taped an interview last week that aired today on Manhattan Neighborhood Network and so forth. And among other things you said in that program was, you had a sentence or two where you said, the big banks must be broken up. Could you comment on that? What is our relationship societally to the big banks that are called too big to fail? Or maybe comment on what has to happen vis-a-vis the society, vis-a-vis the big
I'm working
banks?
with a very interesting crew called the Public Banking Institute. They're out in California. A woman named Ellen Brown is involved. Is involved, and she's written a book called Web of Debt. Another guy named Mark Armstrong who used to work in finance for IBM. And they're very, very interesting folks.
Les, could you raise your voice, please?
Yeah, try to raise your voice if you can.
Yes,
Les.
okay. Public Banking Institute. And what they're advocating, there is one public bank in the country, a state bank, public, owned by the state. What socialist state is that in? North Dakota. One of the most conservative places in the entire world has a public bank from 1919 as a result of sort of a populist socialist takeover of the state legislature. But it works so well, it's a wholesale bank. Doesn't do retail. It supports the 80 community banks in North Dakota. They had almost no problem during the financial crisis because they didn't buy any of this derivative stuff. They didn't gamble. The top salary right now, the top salary in the bank, the president is $230,000. The average salary of the top 6 officers is $130,000, right? The chauffeur of the top hedge funds make more than these guys, than the bankers make in North Dakota, right? The cook at J.P. Morgan Chase's executive group probably makes more than the average top bank officer in North Dakota. They make $60 million a year for the bank, for the state. It goes right into the state's coffers. Now, what's interesting about them, and this is something I didn't know until I met these folks, every time we pay our state and local taxes any place in the country, anytime you get a driver's license, that money goes somewhere, right? It doesn't go into a big vault in Albany or in Trenton. It doesn't do that. It goes into a very large bank. In fact, almost everywhere, it goes into the too big to fail banks here.
Which are,
$1 trillion a year of our money, our state and local money, goes into the too big to fail banks in New York.
which are,
There's 19 of them. I mean, Chase and Goldman Sachs. And, anybody that's got, there's a list of 19 that the Federal Reserve has that are called systematic, what are they called? Systemically important or systemically significant banks. They're the ones that are supposed to, that we have to watch because they could bring down the economy. They get $1 trillion of our taxpayer money because they're the only ones that can handle the cash flow management that states need. Except in North Dakota. All that money goes to the North Dakota Bank, and that's their working capital. So all the state and local taxes and hunting licenses and whatever go into the Bank of North Dakota. If that was done in all 50 states, you would have the beginnings of a real alternative to the financial system. And they have a new idea, these public banking, these two people that they just told me. People are, if you go around the country and do what I'm doing right now, I've been on a bunch of, especially recently, I've been on a bunch of radio shows and callers calling, and they're like, you want to see something, they hate the Federal Reserve. It comes from the right, it comes from the left, it comes from the center. They view that the Federal Reserve is this kind of like, that's the international Zionist conspiracy that's holding, that's linking all the banks together in New York. And except for the Zionist part, they're kind of right. But what's the alternative? The alternative would be to have 50 state banks, public state banks, and then to have those banks be the people that own the Federal Reserve, that supervise the Federal Reserve, not the private banks in Wall Street. That would be a very interesting proposition. That would make an enormous difference. By the way, the Bank of North Dakota also has policies that if it was done in all 50 states, we would not have an unemployment problem. When they make loans, they insist for every $100,000 that they loan out, one job. By the way, North Dakota has probably the lowest unemployment rate in the country. If we did that writ large, we'd produce, if every state was doing this, 10 million more jobs. 10 million more, because there's, if every state had a bank. So 20 states right now are investigating setting up a public bank. And I think that the way, it's not enough just to take JP Morgan Chase and break it up into 3 or 4 giant banks. They'll just do the same thing. Instead of having 19 systemically important banks, we'll have 50 important banks that'll be doing the same thing. You need a whole entirely new structure. And how about that? A bank that actually serves the people instead of ripping them off. What a novel idea. Anyway, that's what I've been advocating.
what about the credit unions?
That's the next level down. So you have wholesale, well, you have Federal Reserve, then you have that basically controls the money supply, then you have state banks that are wholesale banks, and then you have credit unions and community banks and local banks that are serviced by the wholesale banks. They support them, they help them get, there's a zillion things. Somebody knows banking much more than I can explain. There's a whole lot of functions that a wholesale bank can do that helps community banks.
That's, what you're saying is incredibly important, but also it's incredibly demoralizing. Like me and I'm sure a lot of people here are reading about these derivatives and how dangerous they were 20, 25 years ago. I mean, they've been around for a really long time. And then they sort of got quiet for a while. People started, they were sort of preaching in the night to the darkness. Nobody listened. And then all this stuff happened, and the laws didn't change. Way too few people went to jail or were fined. And the propaganda machine, they have so much money that they just, it's the propaganda machine that the people with money have that are able to do the bending of the minds of the senators and the representatives and whatever. I mean, it's great to have a little person fight, and this should be happening, but how you just feel demoralized. And I mean, it starts with somebody like you and small groups like this.
I'll tell you why I'm not demoralized. I'm not demoralized. First of all, on a personal level, the fact that somebody like me can get an audience for a book like this is, and for the last book, is kind of amazing. I can go on conservative talk radio shows. I was just on a UFO show, basically. You know, ever listen to Coast AM? It's an overnight show. It's on WOR. It's on 500 of the largest AM stations in North America. It has one of the, in every city, it has a large 50,000 watt station. Every single city, major city in the country, and plus a bunch of little stations. They had me on for 3 hours last Sunday night, overnight, talking about this. And the guy, the interviewer was going, "Oh my God, I can't believe that. That's amazing." Just kept again and again and again. So, you know, there were several million people who were, you know, kind of in on that conversation. I mean, maybe most of them were truck drivers driving around in the middle of the night, but still, it was an interesting process. And I've been on that show. It's the third time I've been on that show. So that's on a micro level. On a macro level, Occupy Wall Street happened. And although we didn't take advantage of it in terms of and I really hold us in the progressive movement responsible for not building something. We sort of like, it became a spectator sport. Whoa, look at what these kids are doing. This is wonderful. It's great. We don't want to mess up their thing by getting getting involved. They don't like, they don't like structure, but what we needed was structure. One last point. The other thing that's there, I know it's there. There is a latent anger of the American people towards what happened and what's still happening on Wall Street. It's there. Now, I don't know how it's going to be organized or whether it can be organized, but it's there like it wasn't before 1970. We're someplace new now. It's like a powder keg, and these discussions we're having in Washington are like on another planet. What's going on when you talk to people doesn't take much to get them riled up about the way they're getting screwed by financial elites. So I just did a piece called, to follow this thing, called New American Math, how one Wall Street hour equals 20 years of hard work for the rest of us. That theme is not something I have to make up. People get that instantly, and so it's there. What I don't know is how we can organize it, but it's there, and it wasn't there before, so that makes me optimistic. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Frank Craven.com. And I just want to interject that I believe I'm very thankful for your presentation, but I have to disagree with you that the Occupy Wall Street was shut down by Obama. He put out a call, and the police came in and busted heads. And there was many gray-haired people like me or middle-class people saying, "I want my money back." And the consensus of the majority of people awoke to the fact, and what I maintain, and I would hope that you might embrace this concept, that to be a billionaire is a moral crime. I mean, it's hard to be rich and mega rich, but, after $100 million or whatever, how many golf courses do you have to own? How many shopping malls or whatever? How many millions can you spend in your lifetime? It's like a Dale Carnegie moment, or Bob Marley's ghost is speaking to us. There's certain limits to moral decency, and for a person to accumulate wealth the way Berlusconi does and Bloomberg, these political multi-billionaires that increase their fortune while pretending to be a public servant is ludicrous. And Obama is guilty of a war crime the way Bush is. I think they belong in the dock alongside Kissinger, because we have this collective grief for Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan. As we speak, we live with war. The Pentagon has carte blanche budget, and millionaires have turned into billionaires, and they turn into multi-billionaires, and it's just ludicrous. It's completely insane. It's just immoral. It's disgusting. I think that Oprah Winfrey and all these Mr. Icahn, Mr. Gates, and all these people are so proud of their billions, to me are just morally reprehensible devils that have lost their spirituality, lost their common sense. Because if you accumulate the wealth, then we got this, $14 to buy a pack of cigarettes or get on the toll, or $5 for a gallon of gasoline, or almost $3 for a subway fare, mass transit. There's this critical crisis of complete indifference to the people that And that's what it was Occupy Wall Street. Mothers and parents of kids, the kids' student loans, higher educations, a couple $100,000. What is that? Making us so stupid. You know, the country is like vibrating in a frequency of being shredded and ripped apart by these greedy, out of control monsters that have absolutely no morality, no sense of common civility, no sense of what's right versus what's wrong. It doesn't not Republican, Democrat, left or right. It's just what's right versus wrong. Torture is wrong. Close Guantanamo. War is wrong. Bring the troops home. And stealing from people with defaults and credit swaps and robo signatures and mega deals and lawyers secret loopholing financial mega deals is a bunch of BS. The magic word in Occupy Wall Street, which continues to be the magic word, is transparency. Transparencia. Let's have accountability and transparency, Webster in the boardroom, and let's just have the accounting on the wall and see what's right. Okay, yeah, you make 100,000, 200,000, a million, 100 million, but whoa. Billions, hundreds of billions, and it's just this, greed is acceptable. No, greed is not acceptable. It never has been, never will be. It's against the moral law in the Quran. Muhammad talked against, Jews. It's in the Bible. It's in all what's moral, what's right, what's wrong. There are limits, certain limits to sharing the food and sharing the wealth.
Yes, one issue I think we can very easily start demonizing left and right and talk about Wall Street. They do their own game, but I think the big problem is when you decouple value with activity, because in what they do, trust me, I've done. I'm a rocket scientist, and I've done arbitrage. I've developed these algorithms. Okay, it's very involved. It's very brainy. Maybe it doesn't belong to the marketplace. Maybe it belongs to academia. Maybe banks should do this research academically and find out how the mathematics of these products work. But it's like having doing a research on the nuclear bomb, like Enrico Fermi did. Underneath the Chicago soldier field, and nobody knew. And graphite worked, and now Chicago is still there. If graphite did not work, which they didn't know it would work, we would have gone ablaze.
You make the point that I started with, which is the problem is when you decouple value from activity, you create a monster. Because we now have the exchange of value going on, an exchange of money going on, the extraction of money that has no connection with the creation of value. And they've used the algorithms, through high frequency trading. I don't know if that's what you're involved in, but
yeah, exactly. That's what we're trying to do back in 2005.
Well, they got it down now, where they literally can model the behavior. When we press the button on E-Trade or on a computer to buy something, a high frequency trader has already bought it with their high-speed computer and selling it back to us for a couple of pennies more. Again and again and again, 1 million times an hour, making somewhere between $5 and $20 billion a year. A hidden tax, and producing no socially useful value whatsoever, in fact, adding risk to the system as far as I can tell. But that decoupling of value from activity is the cancer that brings the system down. Because once you decouple activity from value, there's the sky's the limit to how much basically phony profits you can make.
But again, you said before the collapse, they had a whole bunch of writers and propagandists that were paid big money, I'm sure big bucks, by all these billionaires, the 1%. By the way, I read something in the New York Times that they're saying about the rules that become made. They used to be, of the people, by the people, and for the people. The article was of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%, which is sort of true. But these people that wrote this propaganda, they could have skewed the facts, but then the facts became so overwhelming that they had to stop writing or whatever. That's what worries me, because people are always going to be sort of fooled.
No, there's another algorithm here that's at work. It's actually
define algorithm, please.
An automatic program. I'm going to change it now to the word tautology, where something just means something else without you thinking about it. So we still think, gentleman here does not think that, rightfully so. We think that because you make a lot of money and you earned it, quote unquote, in the marketplace, it must mean by definition you've created an equal amount of value. So if you're rich, it's because the market paid you to be rich and you created value equivalent to your wealth. So being rich equals value equals being rich, without questioning that. And that's what we have to question. We have to ask, because over 100 years ago, in the trust busting era, it was recognized the monopoly can create more money for itself without producing any extra value. Monopoly profits sucks. This is what the book's about. A new version, a much more sophisticated version of monopoly profit. The same problem, siphoning money from everybody else without creating value in return. And but what's weird is that most of, even the progressive community doesn't get this, because they run into a hedge fund guy who's giving away money for environmental causes. You've got, what's his name now, Schwartzman, just gave $100 million to the public library. Paulson, $100 million to Central Park. Schwartzman is going to start his version of a Rhodes Scholarship program with China. So his name, the Schwartzman Fellowships, he hopes will go down in history the way, the Rhodes or Nobel, and so people who have this kind of money, I know plenty of people in the progressive community that want to put a hedge fund guy on their board, right? But they're not asking the question of where the hell did this guy's money come from? How is it possible that he made so much money so quickly doing what? And if you ask that question and you pull the veil of transparency, you start seeing what happens, then you start saying, wow, how is that possible? Something's wrong with the way we have things set up. You can make that much money in that short a period of time. And gentleman back here is absolutely right. It's fascinating stuff, right? The modeling that you can put together to design programs, algorithms that work automatically by a computer, and to just make money buying and selling just like that, just taking it right out of the market. One guy referred to it as shooting fish in a barrel during the crisis. Another guy said he did not have a losing day, this high-frequency trading, not one losing day in 5 years. And the longest he ever held a stock, was?
30 seconds.
2 seconds.
2 seconds.
2 seconds, right? 30 seconds is a lifetime, my God. 30 seconds, you could get fleeced by 15 different high-frequency traders just like that. No, 2 seconds. So, and the estimate is 50 to 80% of the stock market. 50 to 80% are high-frequency traders.
So what you're saying, it seems to me, if you take a really objective point of view, I can understand Frank's fury and all of this, but okay, it's a derivatives market that's a big bubble and it's going to pop, and we're all going to go down with it. What's the safety net? What do you see? The credit unions are reliant on this.
It doesn't even matter if it pops. As it's operating, it's got its hand in your pocket.
Right.
It's taking a little bit of your pension money, a little bit of your mutual funds, a
So
little
we're
bit of your
all
savings.
being affected by it.
Every single time it moves at all, you're losing a little.
But is there some type of safety net? Is the cooperative movement something? What can we do?
I don't know. There's Gar Alperovitz has a new book out, paperback, less expensive than mine. So it's a good read about possibilities of alternative structures that are growing up right now. So that
Local currency, like Ithaca dollars and trading,
yes,
and working with the gross national product. During the 90s, Clinton had a good economy, and we bounced because we were producing cell phones and computers, and we had manufacturing. Now it's all just, the wolves are guarding the hen house, and there's no oversight, there's no in-house manufacturing
I don't
going on.
buy both things that you said. I don't think the currency is the problem. Fiat currency or any kind of currency is the problem. And I don't buy that Clinton's era was nirvana. Clinton was the biggest deregulator of finance.
Yes,
He
absolutely.
was he let them loose. He started the romance because these wealthy people, he was luring them into the Democratic Party, and he gave them what they wanted, which was more and more control. Look, in 1929, you can't turn the clock back, but you can learn something from what happened. In 1929, we had a financial crash, right, after, you know, a different kind of stock market bubble burst. In the 30s, it became the new common sense that what you had to do with Wall Street was put your foot on their neck. You had to regulate them virtually into oblivion. And they did. For the next 50 years, Wall Street was highly regulated. And the salaries in Wall Street, there's a great chart, I think I've got it in the book. Salaries in the non-financial sector, salaries in the financial sector. They were identical. In other words, given your level of skill, level of experience, education, whether you worked in the in the rest of the economy or worked on Wall Street, you're in the same. Once we started deregulating, and it really took off right around 1980, but not just with Reagan, even Carter got into the act. You could see the same diagram goes like this. Wall Street salaries go way up, and the rest of the economy stays flat. So we unlearned everything we learned from 1930 to 1980. We had stability. There were very few financial crises in the globe at all. Once we slowed down the international financial system because we learned during the Great Depression that if you didn't control it, it would wreck you. And then we forgot. And we had a period, and we had, you know, one president after the other basically throwing more money at Wall Street. Here, okay, we're going to deregulate this, we're going to deregulate that. Sure, you can, you know, we have a Glass-Steagall that separates you, that's okay, you can merge together. You can do derivatives. Matter of fact, we're going to pass a law that says no one's allowed to even regulate derivatives. So we set it loose, and lo and behold, we got virtually another 1929. We're just lucky that there was a thing called unemployment insurance and Social Security already in Medicare and Medicaid in place, or we would be, it would be very reminiscent of the past. So, you know, there's lessons to be learned there. The difference is the world is different now. And I don't think that we can go back to, you know, Glass-Steagall, you know, separating the banks between investment and other commercial banking. I don't think it would work because the hedge funds exist and they'd be able to move the money through the hedge funds to do exactly the same thing. So I think we need something more creative, more bold. And the more I've been into this, I found, it's funny, when I wrote the first book, I was moved by the fact that this school system lost $200 million in a matter of months. So I taught myself what a synthetic collateralized debt obligation was, which was not an easy thing to do at first because no one was writing about that kind of stuff in a non-technical language. I wish I knew you to be able to work on it. It's complicated. Structured finance was complicated. Then the crash happened and it wasn't so complicated because people started to kiss and tell online and explain it. But I thought the fact that they lost was an accident. You know, the market went down, they were stuck with bad stuff, and the school districts lost $200 million. No, it wasn't an accident. It was designed to fail. That was the part. So I've moved to the left on these questions.
How was it designed to fail in terms of the school system using that money?
They went to the school system and they said, here's a great thing that you can, we're going to sell you this, and you're going to borrow $150 million and put up $50 million your own. We're going to sell you these financial instruments that are AAA, AA rated. And what they were bad debts that the Royal Bank of Canada had packaged together, designed to fail. They didn't buy it. They put their $200 million up as an insurance policy.
In bonds.
They put the money up, it basically went to a bank in the Grand Cayman Islands and sat there. And if these crummy loans that were underneath it all crashed, which they did in 6 months, they lost their $200 million. That was the insurance policy. They became an insurance company without knowing it. Imagine that.
So it's a question of education in terms of the people that manage our money.
No, it's a question that this was allowed to happen in the first place. How can you turn a school system or a pension fund into an insurance company? How can you do that? How how can you allow, and then set them up so that you can sell them something that's designed to fail? It's like me selling you a car that's gonna crash so I can collect the insurance.
So it's all criminal.
No respect to us.
It's only criminal if there's a law against it. What's criminal is that there's no law against it.
yes.
That's the criminal part.
Exactly.
And that starts with Clinton. He was the one who said, no, there shouldn't be a law against it.
But a crime is determined by victims, and when a person has been foreclosed upon unfairly or whatever, then there's many victims. So it is a crime, whether or not it's legal or not. Author.
Victimless
Yes.
crime.
What?
Okay.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions.
Shoot.
Speak up, man.
Okay.
Good.
When you talked about Clinton and his disentanglement of his glass steagall, et cetera, he did something at that point also. He allowed something called MERS to be established. The mechanical electronic transfer of deeds.
What?
Of deeds, of property.
Oh, okay.
MERS. Whereas if somebody bought a piece of property,
Right.
they'd have to register it with county clerk, and everything would be on paper, written, et cetera, et cetera. It would be accessible to anybody who would go down to the county clerk. You know, the clerk would bring it out, blah, blah, blah. Now, with the substitution of something called MERS, a Jane Doe like myself cannot,
Can't find what you own.
not only that, but you cannot go into MERS because it's a big boys club. You have to be a member. And your membership is because of your qualifications. That means it's a very small club, and only those within it know where the transfer of properties and ownership is on many different transactions. One, that's what Clinton did. Secondly, this last year, the district attorney brought a suit against the rating companies. Now, you're talking about worthless bundles being packaged up and sold, you know, the worst of the worst, packaged up, securitized, et cetera, and sold. Somebody had to say this was a triple A, a triple B, triple C, or a plus, 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 plus. And those were the rating companies that the stocks and bond markets and such are very much concerned with. They're rated. Moody's, Standard & Poor's, et cetera, et cetera. Now, they're all in the who's gal, well, not quite yet, but because it was a good old boys club again. And they were giving AAA ratings to this trash that was securitized and bundled and sold to nations, as well as to other banks, et cetera, that bought this crash in 2008.
Yeah, you know, the number one performing stock, I believe, on the Dow Jones during this whole period, the 6-year period, was Moody's. Yes.